You know, sometimes life doesn't stab you in the chest. Sometimes, it slips the knife between your ribs so quietly, you don't even feel it until you look down and realize you're bleeding. That's exactly what happened the day my brother made the biggest mistake of his life. Before the story, kindly like, subscribe and tell us where you're listening from. It was a Saturday night. I was at home, half asleep on the couch, when my phone buzzed. A voice note. I didn't think much of it at first. My brother and I always sent each other little updates or stupid jokes. I hit play, expecting a laugh. But what I heard wasn't a joke. The first voice was my brother's. Smooth, confident, dripping with arrogance. Don't worry, she'll cave. He's too soft. He trusts us blindly. Then my sister's laughter followed, low and mocking. Exactly. All we need is to keep pretending we care. Make him believe we're honoring Dad's memory. He'll hand over the will himself. For a second, I thought maybe it was some prank. But then my brother's voice dropped lower, sharper. Once he resigns it into our names, it's over. He won't even see it coming. And my sister? She added the final dagger. He's always been the fool. Let him stay that way. I froze. My heart slammed against my ribs. The voice note wasn't meant for me, God knows who he was trying to send it to, but it landed in my inbox like a ticking bomb. I replayed it. Once. Twice. 3 times. And with each replay, my chest got heavier. My own brother. My own sister. Plotting to strip me of my father's will, of the very thing Dad trusted me to protect. They weren't just scheming for money. No, this was betrayal at the deepest level. I sat there in the dark, phone in my hand, listening to their voices echo in my ears. Do you know what hurt the most? Not the greed. Not even the deception. But the fact that they thought I was that blind. That gullible. That weak. I could have called them out right there. Could have stormed into their homes and shoved the recording in their faces. But something inside me whispered, no. Don't waste it. Don't waste the perfect weapon they've handed you. And that's when the plan began forming in my head. See, revenge isn't about anger. Not the kind that burns hot and fast. That kind dies out before it does any real damage. True revenge is cold. Precise. Calculated. And that night, I made a decision, they would never see me coming. The next morning, I saw them at breakfast. My sister greeted me with that fake smile of hers, the kind that used to fool me. My brother clapped me on the back, pretending everything was fine. If they noticed the tightness in my jaw, the way my eyes lingered just a little too long, they didn't show it. Brother, my sister said sweetly, we've been talking, maybe it's time we discuss Dad's will again. You know, just to make things fair. Fair. That word almost made me laugh. They had no idea I already held the knife at their throats. I nodded, calm as stone. Of course. We should talk. Dad would want us united. If only they knew what those words really meant. Inside, my thoughts were racing. Every interaction from that point on became part of my theater. I smiled when I wanted to scream. I agreed when I wanted to expose them. I played the fool, the clueless brother, all while that voice note burned in my pocket like dynamite waiting for the right moment. At night, I lay awake, headphones pressed to my ears, replaying the recording again and again. Their voices kept me sharp, kept the fire in my chest controlled, steady. Each time I heard their words, he's always been the fool, I felt less like a victim and more like a hunter sharpening his blade. I started to watch them differently. My brother's arrogance, the way he carried himself like the world already belonged to him. My sister's manipulative charm, dripping poison behind honeyed words. They thought they were smart, unstoppable. But they didn't know they'd already lost. Because here's the thing, once you show me who you really are, I can't unsee it. And once I know the battlefield, I'll never step onto it unprepared. So, I waited. I plotted. I let them dig their own graves with every lie, every smile, every little attempt to nudge me towards signing over Dad's will. And while they were busy playing me, I was preparing the stage for their downfall. A downfall that would come at the perfect moment, in the perfect place. Looking back now, that voice message was more than a mistake. It was prophecy. A prophecy of the night their masks would shatter, and I would finally show them who the real fool was. But I'll get to that. For now, remember this: betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from family. But it also fuels the sweetest revenge. And mine had only just begun. You ever heard the saying, keep your friends close, but your enemies closer? Well, I learned it wasn't just a quote for movies. It was survival. And the cruel part? My enemies had my blood running through their veins. After that voice message, something inside me broke. But at the same time, something new was born. I decided then that my brother and sister would never know I was onto them. No. I would give them the show of their lives. The mask went on the very next morning. I became the clueless younger brother again, the one who trusted too much, smiled too easily, and never questioned their motives. The very role they expected me to play. And oh, how quickly they bought it. My brother, Daniel, was the first to test me. He came by my office 2 days later, leaning against the doorway like he owned the place. You know, he started, casual but calculated, Dad always wanted us to handle things together. Don't you think it's time to make things official? You, me, and Sis, all equal partners. It's the fair way, right? Fair. That word again. My hands itched to pull out my phone and press play on his betrayal, but I didn't. I leaned back in my chair, smiled, and said, "You're right, Danny. Fairness is important. Let's think about it carefully." I swear I saw the corners of his mouth twitch upward. He thought he was winning. Later that week, my sister, Grace, tried her own approach. She invited me to lunch at Dad's favorite restaurant. Over steaming plates of food, she touched my hand, eyes soft with false sincerity. "You've carried so much responsibility, brother. Dad trusted you with everything. But maybe it's time to share the load. Let us help you. We're family. We'd never hurt you." Those words almost made me choke on my drink. Never hurt me. If only she knew I could still hear her laughter in that recording, mocking me as the fool. But I played my role to perfection. I lowered my gaze, let my shoulders sag a little, and sighed like a man overwhelmed. "You're right, Grace. I can't do this alone forever." The sparkle in her eyes told me everything. She thought I was breaking. She thought her performance was working. And the beauty of it? I encouraged it. Because the more confident they became, the deeper they walked into my trap. Now, don't get me wrong, pretending to be blind wasn't easy. Every meal we shared, every conversation we had, felt like walking barefoot over broken glass. My blood boiled beneath the surface, but I learned to smile with my teeth while hiding the rage in my chest. And in the shadows, the real work began. My wife, Evelyn, was the only one I trusted with the truth. One night, I played the recording for her. She sat there, fists clenched, eyes blazing. "They think they're clever," she whispered. "But they've forgotten you're your father's son. He taught you better than this." She was right. Dad always believed strength wasn't about shouting the loudest, it was about knowing when to stay silent and when to strike. And with Evelyn by my side, I started putting the pieces of my revenge in place. We met with lawyers in secret. I made sure the will was unshakable, airtight, and set in stone. 70% of Dad's estate would remain mine, as he had intended. The remaining 30%? Not for the greedy hands of my siblings. No. That would go to Mrs. Adelaide, the humble woman who had served our family with loyalty and love until Dad's last breath. She deserved it more than they ever would. Do you realize the beauty of this? While Daniel and Grace were rehearsing their fake smiles, preparing their speeches to corner me, I was already securing their downfall. But let me tell you, the hardest part wasn't the planning. It was the waiting. Every family gathering became a stage play. They whispered to each other when they thought I wasn't looking. They exchanged smug glances whenever the topic of Dad's legacy came up. And I, sitting right across from them, smiled like a man blissfully ignorant. Inside, though. Inside, I counted the days until the performance reached its finale. The breaking point came one evening at Grace's house. She poured me a glass of wine, her voice honey-sweet. "Brother, we were thinking, maybe next week, we could sit down with a lawyer. Make things official. Just a formality, you know. Dad would want it that way." Daniel, sitting beside her, nodded. "Yeah. We'll bring the paperwork. You just sign, and everything will be settled once and for all." I raised my glass, hiding my smirk behind the rim. "Next week, then. Let's make it official." And just like that, the date of their destruction was set. That night, when I got home, I stood in front of the mirror and looked at myself. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize the man staring back. He wasn't the naive fool they believed him to be anymore. No. He was something sharper. Stronger. Deadlier. And for the first time since that voice message landed in my inbox, I allowed myself a smile. Because the mask had done its job. They thought they were leading me to the slaughter. But in reality, I was leading them straight into my trap. And trust me, when the curtain finally rose at that dinner table, their world would come crashing down in ways they never imagined. You ever planned something so carefully that every tiny detail started to feel like part of your own heartbeat? That's what those weeks felt like, a slow, steady rhythm of preparation. While Daniel and Grace polished their smiles and rehearsed their lines, Evelyn and I were building the stage. And not just any stage, a steel trap stage with no back door. I'll be honest, part of me surprised even myself. I had never imagined I could be this cold, this patient. But revenge, when it's real, demands patience. It requires you to think like an architect, measure, cut, and fit every piece so perfectly the house collapses exactly how you intended. The first move was logistics. Evelyn and I met with our lawyer in secret, not because we were ashamed, but because secrecy was a weapon. We needed paperwork that couldn't be overturned, a will that would stand up in court and make any challenge expensive in both money and reputation. We drafted clauses that echoed Dad's known wishes, we secured witnesses, and we set the timing. 70% stayed where Dad wanted it, with the son who could manage it. 30% would go where Dad's heart had often been, to Mrs. Adelaide. If you don't know Mrs. Adelaide, imagine the kind of person who treats living rooms like sanctuaries and people like family. She'd been with Dad through coughs, late-night newspaper readings, small triumphs, and the quiet work of caregiving. While my siblings schemed, she braided meals, comforted him when he was stubborn, and sat by his bedside when the rest of us were busy. Dad trusted her. Not because she was flashy or smart in negotiations, because she loved him simply and fiercely. When I told Evelyn I wanted Adelaide included, she didn't blink. He would have wanted that, she said flatly. She'd already met Mrs. Adelaide, seen how her hands trembled when she spoke of our father, heard the quiet loyalty in her voice. Evelyn also understood the symbolism. Giving part of Dad's legacy to someone outside the bloodline would sting my siblings more than anything the courts could do. Next, we staged the family dinner. It had to feel casual and unthreatening, a final olive branch. I chose the date, invited everyone, and suggested the cozy private room at the old bungalow where Dad used to host Sunday suppers. Grace and Daniel lapped it up. They thought it would be the moment I capitulated, the scene they would post about later, the quiet day they'd use to rearrange the world in their favor. I sent subtle nudges to make sure they came polished. A soft text to Grace, "Wear something cheerful, please." And a quick call to Daniel about how nice it would be to all be together. Both responded with polite enthusiasm. Their arrogance was the kind that flutters like a moth around a porch light, not seeing the flypaper below. But let's not make this a one-sided play. I had my own rehearsals. Evelyn and I ran through the script. She'd sit by my side at the table, a calm island in the sea of fake concern. The lawyers, two of them, would arrive not as menacing strangers but as the kind of professionals Dad himself would have trusted, polite, solemn, and impeccably formal. They brought with them the documents, the witnesses, and the certified copies. I made sure they had a copy of the voice note, too, a piece of evidence, not for legal theatrics, but for the moral reckoning that would come at the table. Here's something important: evidence is one thing, spectacle another. The voice message was the spark, the undeniable proof of betrayal, but revealing it needed timing. I wanted my brother and sister to feel the weight of their words. They needed to hear their own laughter echo in the room they thought they'd inherit. The lawyers were there to make sure the moment had teeth, that the will I presented could be executed then and there if I wished. The days leading to the dinner were a tightrope walk. I played the role of the man undone by grief, of the man who needed coaxing and advice. I let them make suggestions, allowed them to take the lead in conversations about property, about respecting Dad's last wishes. I encouraged their confidence because confidence makes mistakes obvious. Daniel started making casual comments about which rooms he'd turn into what. Grace sent me articles about property taxes and trustees with little hearts in the texts. They were rehearsing ownership in public like kids dividing up a cake before cutting it. Between these performances, Evelyn and I met with Mrs. Adelaide. I won't lie, it was the hardest meeting. I wanted to include her quietly, shield her from the spectacle, but she had an integrity that wouldn't let her be used like a prop. She came to our little flat with a tray of tea and 2 plain buns, and she sat down and listened with a dignity that made me want to cry. "Sir," she said, calling me that old-fashioned name only the truly familiar use, "I never wanted anything from your father. I loved him. I couldn't imagine taking more than a memory." Her voice trembled, but she didn't waver. "You won't be taking anything you don't deserve," I told her. "This is because of what you did for Dad in the quiet hours, Adelaide. He trusted you. I want you to be secure." She reached for my hand and squeezed it like a benediction. "If this is what he would have wanted, then I will accept. For him." The day before the dinner, I double-checked everything. I met the lawyers at noon and watched them place sealed envelopes into a leather folder. We confirmed witnesses, we verified signatures, and we reviewed the story we'd tell, not a lie, not even a half-truth, just a carefully chosen sequence of facts, presented with the proper legal weight and the right emotional cadence. That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed the voice note again, not out of anger now but as a metronome for what would come. There's a strange calm that settles in before the storm, an almost reverential silence, where your thoughts click into place like the final pieces of a lock. I stared at the ceiling and thought about Dad. I thought about his hands, the way he used to say, "Protect what matters." I thought about the promise I'd made to him in the hospital, and how that promise was about to be kept. When the morning of the dinner arrived, the bungalow looked the same as all summer evenings had. The jasmine still clung to the fence, the chairs still had faint imprints from years of use, and the air smelled faintly of lemon polish. Nothing betrayed that the house was about to become a courtroom. My plan was simple: let them come in arrogant, let them speak their entitlement aloud, and then, with the quiet precision of a surgeon, cut them out. The lawyers would present the will. Mrs. Adelaide would be there. Evelyn would hold my hand, and the voice note would play, not loudly, but with clarity that made every word impossible to deny. I walked out the front door and felt something new. This wasn't just about property or vengeance anymore. It was about making sure my father's name wasn't trampled by greed. It was about showing that loyalty, quiet and steadfast, could be rewarded. It was about teaching a lesson that would not just humiliate my siblings but perhaps, in some small way, save them from themselves. As I drove to the bungalow, my hands gripped the steering wheel. The trap was set. The actors were where I needed them to be. The final scene was only hours away. And if patience had been the hardest test so far, then execution would be its brutal cousin. I felt ready. The blade was sharp. The audience, my family, was about to see the ending they never expected. YouTube fam, if you've ever wondered what it feels like to stand at the center of a room where every face wears a different lie, let me paint that picture for you slow and clean, because this was the moment everything either collapsed or snapped back into place. The bungalow smelled like all the family memories wrapped into one place, lemon polish, old wood, and jasmine from the porch. We'd put candles in the dining room to make the evening look warm, soft, like nothing heavy would be decided here. That softness was deliberate. I wanted them comfortable. Comfortable people make careless mistakes. They arrived on time, of course. Punctuality for them was part of the performance. Daniel walked in like he already owned the place, adjusting his cufflinks without looking at anyone. Grace wore that practiced sweetness that could scald you if you weren't careful. Her laugh was tuned to the exact decibel that says, innocent. Parents and cousins hugged, exchanged pleasantries. I played my part, smiled, hugged, joked. Inside, I felt the same cold focus I'd had since the voice note. Everything looks lovely, Grace said, eyes darting like someone searching for an angle. She took a seat opposite me. Daniel sat beside her, elbow nudging like a claim stake. I watched their hands, their faces, the little ways they looked satisfied with the world, as if they were already counting rooms. Evelyn sat to my left. She looked like any supportive wife doing the right thing, calm, polite, the small nods that made strangers comfortable. But her hand under the table gripped mine with steady intent. That was the only part of the evening that felt real, solid, a tether to the plan I had crafted until it felt like a second skin. Conversation started light, old stories of Dad's pranks, shared memories. But the small talk was a scaffold. Everyone here knew why we were gathered. You could feel the air hold its breath, waiting to see what move I would make. Halfway through the main course, Daniel cleared his throat and smiled that predatory smile he wears when he thinks he's being generous. Look, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, we've been family through thick and thin. I know you've had a lot on your shoulders, brother. Maybe it's time we make things official. We can go over the documents now, if you want, just as a show of good faith. He reached for his napkin with the ease of a man expecting applause. A few heads turned. Somewhere in the room someone laughed softly, the sound of a future already decided. Grace leaned forward, eyes shining with triumphant sympathy. It'll be easier that way. For everyone, she said. I let the silence hang like a curtain. My voice was slow when it came. I appreciate that, I said. I do. I folded my napkin, set it down, and kept my expression neutral, exactly what they wanted. I could see their smugness swell like a balloon. They were convinced. Then I did something small and, at the time, entirely theatrical. I reached into my jacket and slid my phone onto the table, face down. The motion was casual, but I could tell it made Daniel's jaw tighten. He stole a look. Grace's smile faltered for a heartbeat, just long enough for me to see the cold flash behind her eyes. I brought someone with me, I said softly. Someone Dad trusted. I let the pause do the work, let the weight of the sentence settle. The room leaned closer, oblivious. And then the outward door opened as if on cue, and in walked Evelyn, calm, composed, and behind her, two lawyers in dark suits who wore that exact look of professional solemnity that makes a living room feel like a courthouse. They glided in like punctuation you can't ignore. That split second where their eyes met the lawyers' faces, that's when I saw it, the first shred of panic in Daniel, the micro-expression that eats at arrogance. Grace's hand went to her throat, fingers trembling like a woman feeling a storm on the horizon. Is everything all right? My mother asked, voice small. Evelyn took a step forward and, with a quiet that carried through the room, said, we thought it best to bring everything to light tonight. She nodded once at the lawyers. There are documents. Witnesses. And, evidence. Evidence. The word landed like a bell. Daniel tried to flash a smile, to shrink the moment, to make my reaction seem overblown. Evidence. Of what, exactly? He asked, voice artificially casual. I pushed the phone toward him and tapped play. It started soft, the clink of cutlery, a low laugh, and then their voices cut through, crisp and cold in the quiet room. He's too soft. He trusts us blindly, my brother said in that voice that had sounded so ordinary in a private clip and suddenly sounded treacherous in public. My sister's laugh followed, the same mockery I'd heard a dozen times in the safety of my own head. Make him believe we're honoring Dad's memory, she said, and the room felt like it tilted. Everything after that happened fast, like a slow-motion sequence where every movement is carved into sharp focus. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Cousins leaned forward, eyes wide. Daniel's face lost color. Grace's composure cracked, her lips moved as if to form a denial that never found air. Daniel, I said, my voice quiet enough that no one could mock it. Grace. I let the names hang with gentle precision. You recorded that conversation, didn't you? You left it where it could be mistakenly sent. You thought, what? That no one would ever hear it? Daniel lunged, tested the distance between us with a blink, tried to reach for the phone as if to drag it from the table. The lawyer nearest him stood, hand halfway to his arm, a professional barrier. Daniel swallowed. That's not, he started. But the room had heard enough. Stories that could be dismissed in whispers were now loud, undeniable. My mother's eyes filled in a way that broke me for a second. Not for myself, no, but for the weight of what we were destroying. I'd never intended to hurt the old woman, but truth has a way of shredding everyone it touches. Grace tried to speak then, words tumbling in a rush. We were trying to protect the family, she said, voice high and brittle. You don't understand the pressures. Protect the family by stealing from it. I cut in. My hand tightened on the table. By laughing about it behind my back. The anger curled in my chest, controlled but hot. She looked at me then, not at the room, not at my mother, but at me, and for the first time in my life I saw real fear. Not the performative kind they use to get ahead, but the animal kind that shows when the rug is pulled. Daniel's features had hard lines now, like someone who'd been caught mid-lie and knew the rest would fall apart. The lawyers moved with quiet efficiency. One produced a document, a certified notice that the will had been reviewed, witnessed, and secured. The other, without theatrics, mentioned liabilities, legal consequences of attempted fraud, and the kind of protections that make greedy plans collapse under red tape. But legalities weren't what did the damage. It was the sound of their own voices, mocking, calculating, echoing in the room they'd planned to claim. There's a humiliation that goes beyond a courtroom. There's the slow, grinding realization that you were the villain in the story you were trying to write for someone else. And as the shock settled, conversation splintered into frantic questions and brittle accusations. Daniel tried to blame a misinterpretation. Grace tried to cry. My mother looked between us like she was trying to gather lost pieces of a life. I won't lie, this was cruel. It was meant to be. But cruelty and justice are sometimes neighbors, tonight they shared a fence. I watched their faces fall, and I felt relief, not the victory of money, but of truth laid bare. For too long, their lies had been comfortable. For too long, my silence had been the balm they used to sleep. Evelyn squeezed my hand under the table, and that small squeeze said everything I needed to continue. The stage was set, the moment had come, and the masks, oh, the masks, were cracking in a way that made every silent night worth the wait. We weren't done. Not by a long shot. But the first blow had landed, clean and unavoidable. The room buzzed with the electricity of exposed secrets. The next movements mattered. And I sat back, watched, and let them learn what it means to mistake kindness for weakness. Let me take you into that room again, because this was the night everything came full circle. The bungalow's dining room, with its soft candles and polished wood, no longer felt like a place of family warmth. It felt like a courtroom. My brother and sister sat across from me, their faces pale and crumbling, their masks torn apart by their own words. The laughter they once used as a weapon now rang in their ears like a curse. The lawyers were calm, professional, almost too calm for the storm that was brewing. Evelyn sat steady at my side, her hand still wrapped around mine under the table. My mother was silent, tears hanging in her eyes, her world tilted in ways she hadn't prepared for. The air was thick, heavy with the weight of betrayal and the anticipation of what would come next. And then I spoke. You thought I was blind, I said, voice low but sharp enough to cut through the silence. You thought I'd hand over everything our father worked for because I trusted you. Because I loved you. Because you were my blood. Daniel opened his mouth, but I raised a hand, silencing him. Grace's tears had started to flow, her mascara streaking down her face. But sympathy wasn't in me anymore. Not tonight. Do you know what Dad said to me in his last days? I asked, scanning their faces. He said, protect what matters. Not everyone who carries your blood carries your heart. I didn't understand it then. But tonight, I let the words linger. Tonight I understand. The lawyers placed the documents on the table, their movements slow, deliberate. Everyone leaned in. The papers were sealed, stamped, final. This, the lead lawyer said, is your father's estate as secured under the last review. He adjusted his glasses, his tone clinical. 70% remains with the trustee designated by your father. The remaining 30% has been reassigned under his son's discretion, in line with his wishes for legacy. Daniel shifted forward, desperate. Reassigned? To who? To us. I smiled, not with joy, but with the calm of a man who had carried silence like a blade. No, Daniel. Not to you. Not to either of you. Gasps echoed around the table. Grace's hand flew to her mouth. Daniel's jaw tightened, veins pulsing at his temples. The 30%, I continued, goes to the one person who truly honored Dad when he was alive. The one who respected him, cared for him, and never once asked for anything in return. The door opened again, quietly. And in walked Mrs. Adelaide. Small, humble, her step soft but steady. She looked out of place among the polished shoes and expensive fabrics, but in truth, she was the only one in that room who had earned her place. My mother's tears spilled over at the sight of her. The cousins murmured, shocked but approving. Evelyn's grip on my hand tightened, proud. Daniel's face twisted. You gave it to her? A servant? His voice cracked with rage. I leaned forward, eyes locked on his. She served Dad with loyalty while you two mocked him behind his back. She sat by his bedside when you couldn't be bothered to show up. She loved him when you were busy plotting against me. If anyone deserves part of his legacy, it's her. Grace shook her head, sobbing, you can't do this. We're his children, his blood. Blood? I repeated, my voice dropping to a whisper sharp as glass. Blood doesn't make you family. Loyalty does. Respect does. And you failed him. You failed all of us. The lawyer slid the pen across the table to me. I signed the final line, sealing everything. The sound of my pen scratching against the paper was the sound of chains breaking. When it was done, the lawyer closed the folder with a heavy snap. This will is final. Contesting it will be fruitless and costly. The estate is secure. Daniel pushed back his chair, fury radiating off him. You'll regret this, he spat. I met his glare with a steady calm. No, Daniel. You'll regret underestimating me. Grace buried her face in her hands, sobbing. For once, her performance wasn't for manipulation. It was real. She had lost. They both had. I stood then, slow and deliberate, looking around the room. Tonight wasn't just about property, I said, voice carrying through the silence. It was about truth. Dad trusted me to protect his legacy. And I have. Not for greed, not for power, but because his memory deserves better than betrayal. I turned to Mrs. Adelaide, who stood trembling, tears glistening in her eyes. You deserve this, Adelaide. Dad would be proud. She shook her head, overwhelmed. I only did what was right. And that, I said softly, is why you deserve it more than anyone else. The room was quiet as I walked out, Evelyn by my side, Adelaide following. Behind us, my siblings sat in the ruins of their arrogance, their carefully constructed lies shattered by their own voices. As we stepped into the night air, I finally breathed deeply. For weeks, I had carried the weight of silence, the burden of pretending. Now, the mask was gone. The truth was out. And revenge? Revenge wasn't the shouting, the screaming, the chaos I thought it would be. It was quiet. Precise. A blade sliding cleanly where it was meant to. I looked up at the stars, and for the first time since Dad's death, I felt peace. My siblings had played their game. I had played mine. And in the end, I honored my father the only way I knew how, by protecting what truly mattered. Family isn't who shares your blood. It's who shares your heart. And sometimes, it takes betrayal to remind you of that. That night, I walked away not just with the estate, not just with victory, but with clarity. They thought I was the fool. They thought I'd cave. But in the end, I was the one holding the knife. And that's how I turned their betrayal into their downfall. Family isn't always blood, sometimes it's loyalty. What do you think? Did I go too far, or did they get exactly what they deserved? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more thrilling stories, and share this video with someone who loves a good twist. Until next time, stay sharp, because sometimes the quietest revenge is the deadliest.